Good morning, everybody. Your assignment for the rest of this week is going to be from this final lesson we're going to get to, which is 8-6. We're going to look at solving these quadratic, we're only going to look at expressions today, but they're quadratic expressions. So, I am on page 503, if you want to go to there, because this part right here really helps explain why we're doing what we're doing and how it works. Okay, so big idea is, earlier in chapter 8, we were foiling so that we were multiplying two binomials. Okay, so you are doing the exact opposite today, and that's factoring. So you're going to be given, like previously in the beginning of chapter 8, you were given a problem like this, and you foiled to get an answer like this. Well, today in this lesson, you're going to be given problems like this, and you're going to go factor it to get an answer like this. Okay, so we're just going backwards. And it's a really simple idea. It's kind of like a math game, trying to figure out the two numbers to put in here, like where the 3 and the 4 is. So that's what I'm going to explain to you now. So I wanted you to look at just right above here where my fingers are, just so that you can understand why we're doing what we're doing, like I said. So when we foiled earlier in chapter 8, the first, outer, inner, last, we would come up with, this here, and we'd have 12 here, right? Because 3 times 4. Well, if you look every time, the number that goes in front of the x, wasn't it always the sum of those two, the 3 and the 4? And then the number that came last, the constant by itself, it was always the product, right, of 3 and 4. It's when you multiply the two numbers here. So what you have to do in this lesson today, in order to come up with the two binomials, to come up with what would come in the spot of the 3 and the 4. So if you were given a problem like this, you would say, what two numbers would add up to 7, and what could I multiply to get 12? So that's like how I said it's kind of like a game. You have to think to yourself, what two numbers would add up to 7 and multiply and give me 12? So 3 and 4 obviously do that. So then you just would plug in the 3 there and the 4 there into each binomial, and that's the answer. Okay, so it gets a little bit trickier when they throw in subtraction signs here or here, so that's what I'm going to look at with you in the few examples I have for you. Okay, so before we look at examples, I do want to talk to you real quick about this. You'll see this a lot in Algebra 2. The title of this lesson didn't have an A in the front, but I do want to talk to you about that. All of these you're going to see are just going to have 1 as the coefficient in front of x squared. That's why they didn't even mention an a, x squared. But A, B, and C are just representing numbers. Okay, they're just the coefficients in front of x squared, in front of x, and then that constant there. So, and like I said, for this lesson, it's not always like this, but for this lesson, the A is always going to be a 1. So any problem you see, like see all these, any problem you see, there's always a 1 in front of the squared, the m squared, the d squared, the x squared, okay? But B is the number in front of x, and then C is just that constant, that term, that's just a number. Okay, so example 1, these are pretty easy because the B and the C, so the numbers here and here, are both positive, so you don't have to worry about negative numbers being put in either spot, so it really limits your choices here. So to do these, you're just going to use the variable that they chose to use in the problem. You can just set it up like this every time. So you're going to have two binomials, and I'm just going to put D at the beginning of each one. So then I have to figure out what would go here and here by doing what I said earlier. I need to think of two numbers that would that would add up to 11, and that I would multiply to get 24. So, you could jot down some ideas over here for like numbers that I could multiply to get 24, right? And then start looking at if they add up to 11 or not. Like maybe your first thing you thought of was 6 and 4. Well, those multiply to 24, but do they add up to 11? No. Okay, and then just go from there. 8 and 3. Do those multiply to give you 24? Yeah. And do they add up to 11? Yes. So positive 8 and a positive 3. So that's what fits in there. So as you've heard me say lots of times recently, you can always check these answers. So again, this is the answer. And you can check it by foiling. So I'm just going to do this one time just so you can see what I'm talking about. So foiling to check, always. It's a good idea. So the first would be D times D. The outers would be D times 3. The inners would be 8 times D. And the lasts would be 8 times 3. So then I'll make 11D. Again, that's the whole idea of why we were looking for two numbers that would add up to 11, because in the end here, that's what we're doing with those two terms. And they multiply to give us 24. So if you check and you get the same answer as the problem, you are good to go. It does not matter, this question always comes up, it does not matter if you put this binomial first or this binomial first, it's the same thing. All right, so sometimes they will put it a little out of order than the typical standard form that you see up here. So I think it probably is going to help us out a little bit if we just go rewrite it and put it in standard form so that we can keep track of it a little bit better. So for this one, right, you put the t's first since that's the variables that are getting used. So then think to yourself what we said about the 10 and the 9. So we need two numbers that add up to 10 and that multiply to give you 9. Okay, so think about that for a little bit. So 9 and 1, those add up to 10 and they multiply to give you 9. So there is your answer. All right, so let's look at some that might get a little bit trickier here. So the next example I'm going to look at with you is when B is negative and the C is positive. So like I said, let me rewrite this and we can look at that some more. I'm going to put it in standard form. So m squared, and then I have minus 22m, and then a positive 21, right? So I'm going to put plus 21. So I need to come up, let me restart it out here. So I need to come up with two numbers that add up to negative 22 and multiply to give me a positive 21. So think about what kind of numbers we're going to need. If they need to add up to negative 22 and they're multiplying to give you a positive, what kind of numbers are you going to have here? Is one going to be positive, one going to be negative? Are they both going to be negative? So if they have to multiply to give you a positive, you're going to have two negatives. A negative times a negative makes a positive, and when you add up two negatives, doesn't it get more and more negative? Okay, so adding those signs in there also, even before you come up with the actual numbers, I think it's going to help you too. So they have to multiply to give you 21 and add up to negative 22. So that one is going to be a negative 1 and a negative 21, because those add up to negative 22. And when you multiply these two, you'll get a positive 21. Okay? And then one more like that. This one's already set up in standard form. Okay, so two numbers that will add up to -11 and multiply to give you a positive 28. So just like before, if they have to multiply to give me a positive, it's going to have to be a negative times a negative. And for them to add up to -11 and multiply to give me a positive 28, two numbers that multiply to 28, 7 and 4. -7 and -4, they add up to -11, and they multiply to give you a positive 28. Okay, then the last ones are kind of the trickiest ones. And they're when you have, and they're trickier because you just have more options to think through for your answers. When C is negative, so we haven't seen that yet. Okay, so this one is set up already in standard form. So we have to think of two numbers that add up to a positive 13 and multiply to give you a -48. So right there, think about that. If they have to multiply to give you a negative, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. That's the only way to get a negative when you multiply, okay? So start thinking about all the factors, start thinking about all the numbers that you can multiply and get 48. Okay, sometimes these come quicker than others. Some people are a lot quicker than others at these, so just take your time. Like I said, you can start making a list over here, First thing might have been maybe 12 and 4. That makes 48, right? But if you start making one negative, just making a list over here, both of those would give me a -48, right? But do either of them add up to a positive 13? Nope, nope. So you're going to have to start thinking of more factors of 48. 16 and 3, that's not one that always comes to mind right away, but those do multiply to 48. So one would have to be negative though, right? So do either of these give you a positive 13 when you add them up? That one, when you added those up, wouldn't it give you a positive? So this one would give you a -13 when you added them up, so that one can't work. So yeah, you have to be a little extra careful when C is the negative, when this term is negative. Okay, be extra careful. So positive 16 and -3. So positive 16, -3. Like I said, if you're always ever in doubt, just go FOIL and you will see if you get the original problem or not. Okay, last one. The variable is R. So set them up like that. Okay, and then we have two numbers that need to add up to -2 and multiply to give you -24. So thinking of to multiply to give you a negative, one has to be positive, one has to be negative. So you can add those in right there. Then start thinking about all your factors of 24. And so you can be thinking of 12 and 2. And one of those would have to be negative. I'm just starting out a list here. 6 and 4, one of those would have to be negative. 8 and 3, And one of those would have to be negative. Okay, and then as you test them out to see if the addition part would work, you can just cross them off. So here's a bunch of options. I don't even know if it's all of them. It's not all of them because I could, you can always think of, don't forget about just the simple 24 times 1, right? So I need to find 2 that add up to -2. Add up to -2. Nope. Nope. So yeah, if we added those 2 up, it would give me a -2. This one would be a +2 when they were added up. So it has to be this one here. So I'm just showing you here a strategy that you can use to come up with the 2 numbers. Just start listing all the ways to multiply to get this number here. And then you can start canceling them out if you know they don't add up to the number you need. Okay, so we said +4 and a -6. All right, so when you do these, show me your thinking process on your work off to the side like this. Don't erase it, leave it there so I can see how you're thinking. All right, let me know if you need help on a problem, and I will be happy to make a video or send you some help. Good luck.